This week's blog post is the first in a series on the Clark Art Institute. The Sterling and Francine Clark Art Institute in northwestern Massachusetts has been open to the public since 1955. I'd heard people raving about the Clark for years. This summer I finally visited it. It reminds me of the Frick Collection in New York. Its works are top quality, but it's small enough that you can manage to see everything in a day. Let me give you some background. The Clark family fortune dates to the mid-1800s, when Isaac Merritt Singer engaged lawyer Edward C. Clark to defend patents for the first successful sewing machine. Clark became an equal partner in Singer's company, which was soon the world's leading manufacturer of sewing machines. By the 1860s, the Clark family had majority control of Singer and Company. They remained the leading shareholder until the company was sold a century later. But Edward Clark also had other income. He bought extensive tracts of land on Manhattan's Upper West Side, and in 1880 he announced plans to build the first luxury apartment building in that area. The Dakota was owned by the Clarks until 1960. When Edward Clark died, he left an estate of $50 million, which would be almost $2 billion today. Edward's grandson was Robert Sterling Clark, who went by Sterling Clark. He was born in 1877. He earned a civil engineering degree from Yale, fought in China's Boxer Rebellion around 1900, and led a scientific expedition to northwestern China. When his mother died in 1909, Sterling and his brothers inherited a collection of paintings by notable artists such as Géricault, Jérôme, Millet, Stuart, and Innes. Sterling settled in Paris and met a charming French actress, Francine Clary, whom he married in 1919. He began buying art himself, purchasing Renaissance paintings and works by noted 19th century artists such as John Singer Sargent and Renoir. Eventually he owned 38 Renoirs. Sterling Clark was at first going to bequeath his art collection to Paris's Petit Palais, and then to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and then to the Metropolitan Museum. But Sterling's parents and grandparents had connections with Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts, and eventually Sterling and Francine built a museum in Williamstown to house their collection. It opened to the public in 1955. Sterling died in 1956, Francine in 1960. All these facts come from the timeline that hangs at the Clark. A word on visiting the Clark. When I visit a museum, I like to go through it a gallery at a time, meeting my husband after each gallery and talking about which work each of us liked best in that room. That won't work here because I took about 500 photos at the Clark, but I didn't keep track of when I moved from one gallery to another. So I'm just going to show you the works I like best, century by century. There are many, many, many more artworks at the Clark than I'm going to show in these posts. You really should visit it. On the one hand, it's at the far northwestern corner of Massachusetts. On the other, Massachusetts isn't large, if you're thinking in terms of New York or Florida or Arizona, for instance. The Clark is only a 3-hour drive from Boston or New York City, and it's a mere 1.5 hours north of Ohlona, Frederick Church's gorgeous home on the Hudson. That's the building at the lower right, about which I will post presently. I recommend seeing Ohlona one day and the Clark the next, and staying overnight at Bascom Lodge on the top of Mount Greystone. The facilities at Bascom Lodge aren't luxurious, but the views are gorgeous. And if you're into hiking, you can allow time to do a section of the Appalachian Trail. Okay, back to the art. This piece on the left is the only complete altarpiece by Piero della Francesca that lives in the United States. It was painted in oil, possibly with some tempera as well. Tempera, water-based, was the paint of choice for Italians well into the 15th century. Oil paints, a newer medium developed in Northern Europe, allowed a wide range of more vivid colors. The reds in this painting couldn't have been possible in tempera. Italians only began using oil paints in the 1460s or 1470s, so this piece by Piero is an early example. On oil paints versus tempera and fresco, see Innovators in Painting, Chapter 16. Piero della Francesca was fascinated by mathematically calculated linear perspective, which was also a new technique in the 15th century. See Innovators in Painting, Chapter 18. In this painting, Piero does his best to make the figures seem to stand within three-dimensional space, and they look so solid. Moving on to the 16th century. This is Gossard's Portrait of a Man, circa 1524. The sitter is clearly wealthy and powerful. Look at the rings on his hands and the heavy chain on his neck. But we don't know for certain who he is. The clerk's site suggests that he is Philip of Burgundy, Bishop of Utrecht, who was one of Gossaert's patrons. I like some of Gossaert's portraits at least as much as those of Hans Holbein the Younger. Holbein's far more famous, but Gossaert has a similar knack for capturing the character of very distinctive individuals. Next up, another by Gossaert, Anna van Bergen, circa 1526 to 1530. Anna was the wife of Adolf of Burgundy, an admiral of the Netherlands and one of Gossaert's patrons. Her wealth is indicated by expensive ermine sleeves, a collar of a different kind of fur, and a bejeweled necklace and belt. She's also holding a slip of paper, which suggests that she can read and write, an unusual accomplishment for a woman in the 16th century. And one more portrait by Gossaert, Portrait of a Gentleman, circa 1530. I discussed another Gossaert portrait of about the same date, Portrait of a Merchant, in my talk at Resurrecting Romanticism conference in October 2023. The merchant, at the lower right, has money and taste, to judge from his outfit and his jewelry, but the gentleman, on the left, is a man of both wealth and leisure. The embroidery on his hat and jacket glitters with gold, and gold chains hold his fur cape in place. Through the slashes in his jacket, we can see a shirt that's minutely embroidered. The gloves he holds are far too finely worked to be used for manual labor or even warmth. The hands from these three Gossaert portraits are a great visual lesson in how much an artist can express by pose, color, and jewelry about the character of his sitter. Put your hands in those poses and think about how you feel. And finally, from the 17th century, this is by Rembrandt or a follower, Man Reading, circa 1648. This may be a portrait or it may be simply a painting done to explore facial expression. The style is typical of Rembrandt, and the clerks purchased it as a work by him, but others have suggested that it's the work of one of Rembrandt's followers. I'm inclined to believe it's by a follower because the colors are far more cheerful than those on undisputed Rembrandts that I've seen. Whoever painted it, it's a good study of a man intent on reading. Next week we will look at works at the Clark Art Institute from about 1650 to 1700. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say that well done, Diane, or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.